So welcome along, everyone. We'll just give everyone a bit of a moment to all join us online. So we'll just give it a few moments, give everyone a bit of a chance to join our Workplace Champions webinar. Thanks everyone for taking that time on a Friday afternoon to join us for this lovely chat. We're going to have some great conversations. Okay, we might get started. Looks like we've got plenty of people on the line today, so thank you very much for joining us on our Workplace Champions webinar. This is the second online webinar that we're doing. We're focusing on your role in building an Are You OK culture and how to engage your senior leadership team and really looking at your plan for change. So before we start the session today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're all meeting today. I'm on the land of the Dharawal people today. I'd like to acknowledge the lands upon which you are all meeting today, and wherever you're based. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And if there are any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you for joining us. I'd also like to acknowledge those who have joined us today with lived experience, whether it's direct experience of suicide, including those who have attempted suicide or those who are bereaved by suicide. And of course, if anything that we discuss in today's webinar brings up some tough emotions for you, it's okay, it's totally fine. And if you do need some extra support, strongly encourage you to try and connect with a trusted person, a health professional, access services such as Lifeline, and the phone number for that is 13 11 14. For some of you who have your EAPs at your organisations, you can also reach out to them. So today we're together for about...
Hi everyone, thanks so much for bearing with us as we overcome these technical difficulties. My colleagues have just asked me to jump in and to share a little bit of information about Are You OK? And the Workplace Champions campaign. So the Workplace Champions campaign is an initiative of the National Suicide Prevention charity Are You OK? Now our focus is on encouraging and empowering people to have conversations about all of life's ups and downs, because those conversations can encourage people to access support well before they're in crisis, and also increase people's sense of belonging and connectedness, which are protective factors against suicide. The Workplace Champions campaign provides resources to individuals so that they can start building a culture in their workplace where everyone feels safe, supported, and encouraged. So the primary resource for this campaign is a guide, and inside that guide, there are steps that you can take to ensure that you are able to begin building this culture and develop a practical action plan with tasks that are tailored to your workplace and your setting, so that you can work alongside your colleagues and other champions within the business to enact real change and to bring people on a journey. Because what we do know is that cultural change does take some time and does take some energy. What Are You OK is committed to doing over the coming months is running a number of these workshops where we look at some of the issues that you may face within your organisations as you start to try and create this new culture and start to enact change. And so today's session is all about discussing how we bring senior leadership on that journey. How do we get everyone across the organisation to be committed to building this culture, to buying into this journey of change and understanding the actions that we need to take as individuals and also as a business to start to ensure that everyone feels safe, supported, and encouraged. And so we've got a number of guests today who'll be joining us, and we will of course be welcoming questions from the audience. You'll see that there's a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screens. And if you put your questions in there, we'll be able to either answer them at the end of today's session during our Q&A. And if we are unable to get to it, then we will, of course, try and follow up afterwards with everyone who's registered for today's event as well. So hopefully Mustafa will be joining us again shortly. We'll be kicking things off very soon. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. As a bit of background, I should have probably started with this. I'm Anastasia Simmons. I'm the brand and marketing manager at Are You OK? And I do believe we have been rejoined by our fantastic host, Mustafa. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to switch my
Sorry
and hand it back.
Sorry about that. The lovely world of technology. We have been on the call for half an hour, being prepared, and as I said to the crew before we started today, when you don't need things to go wrong, they always do. And I do apologise for that. I did drop off. Anastasia, can I just check, because I was completely offline there. You introduced the session for us today and asked if anyone has any questions, they can pop that in the chat, in the Q&A.
That's correct. I gave a very brief overview of Are You OK? What our focus is.
Thank you for doing it. Lovely, fantastic. Thanks for issues that we're having, but that's okay. It's Friday, and let's get right back into it. We'll dive straight back in. So, yeah, so thank you very much for that. Now, we're going to be joined by, as I said, a couple of special guests with us today. So I'll be having a chat to both of our guests, and I'll introduce you to those in just a moment. So who will we have on the panel? So I think I mentioned that just before I got cut off, that my name is Mustafa. I am an Are You OK community ambassador, and I will be your host and facilitator for today. I will be joined by a couple of very special guests now, two special guests. So the first of our special guests, Olivia Formica, who is a senior consultant at the FBG Group. Olivia is a registered organisational psychologist who specialises in enhancing wellbeing and effectiveness in organisations. She's passionate about facilitating individual, team and organisational growth to development. Olivia also brings a positive approach to supporting organisations to enhance performance, drive capability and boost wellbeing in the workplace. Working with diverse clients in the public and private sectors, Olivia has expertise in the areas of organisational and employee mental health and wellbeing, psychosocial risk assessment and organisational development. So really fortunate to have Olivia on board with us today. And I've also got Mark Gay, who is the Chief Information Officer at QBE Australia Pacific. Now, Mark joined QBE in 2018, bringing with him a wealth of experience as a senior technology leader in financial services. He has an inclusive leadership style and the ability to define and articulate complex technological strategy in a simple way that engages individuals through change. Now, before joining QBE, Mark was actually recognised as Australian CIO of the Year in 2016. He was also recognised by the Australian Financial Services as the CIO of the Year in 2017. And in 2018 was recognised as one of Australia's outstanding 50 LGBTI leaders in 2018. So that gives us a little bit of an insight into who some of our fantastic speakers are. Mark is passionate about creating a supportive workplace culture because it helps create the right kind of environment for diverse, creative and successful teams. And as a leader of technology teams, he strives to create an environment and nurture and support diversity in the technology space. And more than that, he recognises that a happy, healthy workplace, happy, healthy people are more likely to love their work and their job, which certainly gives us great outcomes across the board. So they're going to be our champions joining us for today, talking to us about their own experiences. And I guess, you know, I want to say thanks to everyone who's online today because there has been a great interest from you to become a workplace champion. And those workplace champions are the key people in our organisations that are the drivers of change. So one of the great things that have been developed by Are You OK as a resource for you to be able to utilise is the Workplace Champions Guide. And I'll ask the team if they can pop that up on the screen for us. Now this Workplace Champions Guide, which has kindly been supported by the Avis Group, will give us 3 key areas to focus on. And we're going to look at some of those. It has 7 areas in the guide, and that gives you a really detailed guide into what contributes to a successful workplace culture. So you can see that there on your screen. It's a free guide. You can download that through the work tab at ruok.org.au. And the 3 key areas that we're going to focus on today are: we have the programs and resources available to support our employees who might be struggling so they can access the appropriate help for their recovery. The second one there is actively managing circumstances that you know might cause stress for your team members. So having a look at some of those key markers that we can preempt and what we can do to support those. And then great to have senior leaders on board the call today, because they can help us to identify this third step. Senior leadership team believes in and regularly promotes supportive culture as being critical to long-term sustainability and success. So we're going to look at those 3 key areas in our discussions with Olivia and Mark today. So I'll invite my first guest on, which is Olivia Formica. So Olivia, if I can welcome you today, and thanks so much for joining us. It's really exciting to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks for having me come and talk about something that I'm really passionate about, culture and wellbeing. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. And on that point of culture, can you, from your, I suppose, experience and your background, what is culture and what contributes to culture?
Yep. So I guess you could describe culture as the way things are done around here. So culture is like the heartbeat of an organisation. It governs our social and our workplace behaviours. Generally, culture is communicated through our norms and behaviours as well. So what we say and do daily. And these are all visible signs of an organisational culture. So that could be how we collaborate with each other, or the patterns of communication that we take with each other. So what we see of culture, these kind of norms and behaviours, is really just the tip of the iceberg. So below that is actually what we say and do. So these are things like organisational values, perhaps some vision and mission statements, and the types of things that are really promoted through newsletters, through the intranet and the like. Then below that, we have what we actually believe. So these are our underlying assumptions, and these are what drive everything. Our underlying assumptions, they drive our behaviours and our values. And so it's really interesting of where these kind of underlying assumptions actually develop from. And essentially, they develop from all of us picking up cues in an organisational environment that communicate what's important to that organisation. So a couple of things that shape and are shaped by these following elements, I guess. There's a big one, which we're going to talk about a bit more today, is leadership. So what do leaders say and do? How do they make decisions, and how do they communicate their decisions? A big one is about brand. So how do you talk about your organisation to your colleagues, but also to other people outside of your organisation? The physical environment. So you ever notice how leaders generally get an office as a way of an organisation expressing that they're important to them? It's in the language that we use, the stories that we tell, who our organisational heroes are, and what are they valued for? And then it's the structure and the systems and processes of how a business organises its people and activities to actually get work done. So I guess we all contribute to culture because all of us can use language and can advocate for things, whilst leaders generally will set a tone of culture by creating an environment where people can contribute. There is, however, this collective responsibility where we can all play a part to really model and enact the behaviours that we want to see from our colleagues as well. So showing genuine care, supporting or advocating for peers, expressing recognition, taking regular breaks from work, talking about well-being. These are all things that you can do day to day that contribute to culture. So consider what you're expressing as important. What stories are you telling to others? and unfortunately, in this circumstance, if you're not part of the solution, it's kind of like you're part of the problem. And, I guess in a culture, if everything comes before well-being, then everything comes before well-being, and well-being will be prioritised last. So I think we all have an important part to play in shaping the cultures that we want to see.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you mentioned there was about how people feel, and culture is all about making sure people are feeling comfortable and included. One of the key things that I'd like to talk to you a little bit now revolves around workplace culture in particular, and feeling supported. So last year, Are You OK commissioned a survey. 1,032 people participated in that survey, and they're representative of workplaces and people working all across the country. And one of the results that came back was that only half of workers strongly or moderately agreed that their managers genuinely care about their well-being and that they felt supported and valued at work. So one of the things I'd really like you to tell us and give us some insight on is how does a supportive environment get created, and what are some of the benefits of having a supportive environment?
Yeah, there's some interesting statistics there, isn't there? So I guess organisations are really starting now more than ever to realise that people aren't robots. We have some complex emotions and needs. And so in creating a supportive environment, I guess support looks different for everyone, right? Everyone has different needs and levels of support to promote their positive well-being. So a supportive environment can be created in a similar way that a high-performing team functions, which is that kind of interpersonal investment in others. So given that we're all different, we also have different levels of well-being. So if you think about well-being existing on a fluid continuum, it's ranging from healthy and positive functioning up one end, then through to kind of coping in the middle, and then through to severe symptoms that impact everyday functioning. So at any given time, people are all along this spectrum. We all move up and down this continuum throughout our lives, right? So given that we will at any given time have people in our organisation at all points of the continuum, what we want to do is we want everyone to have opportunities to enhance their well-being, regardless of the current level of well-being. So the best kind of supportive environment is created by having a range of initiatives that considers and supports all levels. So they don't necessarily need to be very large things, just like we can experience a range of small and large stresses in our work and personal lives. Both small and large things can alleviate the impact of that stress as well. So some things that can be done to create a supportive environment that promotes well-being include talking about well-being as business as usual, not just when something might be wrong. So as you mentioned, Are You OK? You have some great conversation guides that you can follow. But leaders also have the opportunity to check on well-being just as they would any other check-in on workload, or do they have all the information they need to do their job? They can check in on well-being in regular meetings as well. You can create opportunities to come together and connect and to build cohesion. So people, we have a biological need for connection with other people. This can be informal things. You could go out for a coffee, you can call a colleague to check in, you can have a morning tea. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. You can educate yourself on,
sorry, just while you're on that, and I think you've just raised a really good point there, is welcoming and being able to have conversations and coffees and having those types of chats. So if you're saying that the supportive environment is about people connecting with each other, I suppose how do we create an environment where people feel comfortable to be able to share and talk? Sorry, I know, just because you're talking really about that people connection, I think that's a really important point to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really all about creating that kind of psychological safety at work. So an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to talk about what they need to talk about. So whether that be well-being or just any other workplace stresses as well. So this can be driven from a number of different ways. Obviously, leaders play a critical role, but they can promote positive well-being as well. They can show, they can take steps to model that behaviour as well. And it's interesting because this cascading effect often happens from leaders as well. You can just thank people for their time. You can just connect with them on things outside of work. And you can express that it's okay to not be perfect and not be right or have or have anything. You know, we're complex people. We can't check ourselves at the door, unfortunately, on emotional needs and on well-being needs. We have to bring our whole selves to work. Otherwise, how will we even enjoy working anyways?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because we are often, worried about what we're presenting to our peers and our colleagues. And it's okay not to be okay, but it's also important that we recognise some of those things. And again, pointing to people towards the Are You OK website, it looks at some of the signs that you should be looking out for if you are noticing that people aren't doing too well in your workplace. And certainly, looking at what are changing in people's behaviour, what is changing in people's language, and maybe the circumstances that are happening for people as well. So they're all things, and yeah, it's one thing for the business to be able to say, leave your problems at the door when you come in, it's just work problems. But then you leave the office or your home office or wherever you are these days, and then you go back to your home environment and you're expected to leave your work problems at the door and then come in. But we do know that they're all related and intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have, as a psychologist, not figured out a way to kind of separate two personalities in my mind. So if anyone else has figured that out, please share. But it's not something we can do. So just even recognising that in the workplace can have really good benefits for organisations and for individuals.
Excellent. And I'll give you one final question before I move over to Mark. Can you provide a key takeaway for our people who are looking to become champions in terms of, how they can provide that supportive environment, or one thing that you really want to emphasise today?
Yeah, okay. So I would emphasise to consider a range of options, initiatives and approaches, and create a plan that includes everyone. So things that promote positive culture and well-being. So these are all the small things that build a sense of connection, engagement, cohesion. The next thing would be to recognise the stresses. So organisations can consider a range of sources of stresses in their own environment and consider ways to mitigate and reduce the impact of those stresses on staff. So you can build the team's capacity to manage those together. And that's basically an attempt to protect well-being. We know that this stress is in the workplace, so we want to do everything we can to protect our well-being. And finally, to address injury if it's present as well. So establish and also promote available services and available wellbeing pathways for people who might be struggling or experiencing some kind of psychological illness or injury, things like the EAP programs, peer support programs. And also we know that one of the key barriers to accessing supports is actually people not being clear on when and how to access support services. So making sure that everyone is aware of everything and knows where to go when they need to seek support.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Olivia. And look, very important points. And, workplace culture is certainly where it starts from, and some really great hints and tips. Just a reminder, there is the question and answer box. Please shoot through your questions through there. I can see lots of great questions are coming through, and we'll be able to answer some of those live. So I can see a great question there from anonymous attendee talking about genuineness. So we'll get to that very shortly. So keep those questions coming through and we'll get to those in just a moment. I'd like to now welcome Mark Gay onto our panel. So we're talking about culture, we're talking about how we can change that, and a lot of the challenges that people come to me about or talk to me about when they're having difficulties is around how to approach leaders. And so, Mark, you being a senior leader, hopefully we'll be able to get a really great insight into that. And you're working for QBE, that's a really large organisation, it's got a large breadth of staff, really diverse workforce. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach creating a supportive culture at QBE?
Well, I mean, thank you for the opportunity. I think this is such an important thing for organisations to get right. And I think the really powerful thing is that when organisations get this stuff right, it delivers results back to the bottom line as well. So not only is it really important for us to do, it's good for business to create this kind of culture. I think first and foremost, you need to have strong buy-in from the top. There's a whole bunch of tools that you can put in place to try and create the right culture. But if you don't have the right buy-in from the top, and if you don't have the right behaviours happening from the top, those tools are very quickly just seen as tokenistic kind of moves by organisations. So I think it's really important to create that tone, and I think you do that by having really honest conversations. When I think back about the conversations which have brought the need for this to life, there've really been those kind of authentic stories from people that have needed support and have gotten support from the organisation. And I think it's really important for all levels to continue to tell those stories, because that does bring it to life. In terms of tools, back in 2019, we launched an At My Best at QBE program, which was made up of four particular areas. We had something around healthy being, healthy mind, healthy body, and healthy places. And we rolled out a program of work with activities that supported improvements in all those areas. Practically, we did some things like we revamped the employee assistance program. We even rolled that out to some of our customers during COVID, which had a really powerful kind of support mechanism for them as well. We launched Wellbeing Wednesdays, particularly during COVID. We've just been through, like all organisations, an incredible change, probably the biggest change we've ever been through, certainly in my working career, with the way we work. And we were really aware that, that the stresses in people's lives were vastly different. And some of them, it was the first time they'd been in those kind of stressful situations. We're dealing with, homeschooling, isolation, getting that work-life balance right. So we rolled out an activity called Wellbeing Wednesdays, where we actually had things like yoga run across the organisation, nutrition classes and that kind of thing, to really look at that wellbeing aspect of our employees. But one of the big things that we've done that I've found really powerful is the wellbeing check-ins. So now at the beginning of all of our sort of large meetings, and we all get caught up in these, half a day long kind of meetings, we do a wellbeing check-in. So the first half an hour of my leadership meeting every time is spent just checking in to see how people are travelling and giving a score out of 10. And the interesting thing is, when we first started that process, everyone always checked in on what was happening in their work world. They'd be talking about a project deadline or, something that was going on for them. And you had these very benign kind of conversations. But over time, people have become more and more vulnerable. And they talk about the issues they're having with their teenage kid, or their car's broken down, or their dog that's just chewed something up. And that was really great. It was really powerful, because it brought that side of their being into the workplace that, was a part of their whole self, as we just spoke about before, and allowed the whole team to actually connect at a much deeper level. And then finally, we rolled out a mental health first aid network, in addition to a family domestic violence first aid network, or responders network. This is where we trained people across the organisation not to just look at the kind of normal accidents you see in the workplace around physical kind of injury, but really to be quite aware of the mental health and also the domestic violence aspect that may be going on for people as well.
Terrific. And it seems like there's lots of different layers there, and really focusing if I could put it, putting your people at the core and really focusing on people and how they're managing and what's going on for them.
Completely agree.
One of the words you used there was buy-in. And I think one of the key things, that a person who's trying to introduce a culture change in a business is a little bit worried about what does buy-in look like. How do I know, first of all, if I've got buy-in from the leadership team? And as you've mentioned, it's crucial in cultural change. So what would be your guidance to someone looking to get their senior leaders? And I know you said talk about having genuine conversations and honest conversations, but how do you get senior leaders actively engaged and involved?
Well, I think there's a couple of aspects to this. One thing is that the buy-in doesn't have a start and stop date. It sort of needs to be continual. So buy-in can change in a heartbeat, whether it be the topic we're talking about now or anything in life. So, for me, that the conversations that we have to get buy-in at the start, they need to be continual across the organisation, and they need to be those really authentic kind of stories, because when you hear those stories, you can often relate to something in either your own life or someone that you know, and it kind of makes it real and it makes it meaningful for you. I think the other thing that's sort of really important, not to lose sight of, and something that I've thought about a lot as I get older, which is kind of a sentence I never wanted to use, is around legacy. And, I think, as leaders, it's really, really important that we're clear in our own mind what kind of legacy we want to leave behind. Without that clear view of having a legacy, you just get stuck into the operational side of the business and you never actually get a chance to lead. And I think if you challenge leaders about what their legacy is going to be, most people will say that they wanted to be someone that could get stuff done, was considered a nice person and engaged workforce. And I think these are all sort of attributes of a legacy that does require a very safe place for people to bring their whole self to work, and a very supportive and kind culture.
Yeah, terrific. And I think, having those comments around power of story really engages people, because it gives you an experience, it gives you something to relate to, and it really gives you an opportunity to say, hey, actually, I can see that, and I can touch that, I can feel that, I can understand what that looks like.
Yeah, and look, the absolute key thing is that it doesn't start and stop. It does start, but it never stops. Those stories need to continually keep going. The wellbeing check-ins are just a fantastic reminder. And, you'll be sitting around the executive table and you'll all do a check-in. And generally everyone's pretty upbeat, and they'll say, I'm a 7.5 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, and I've got these things going on in my life. And occasionally someone will say, actually, I'm a 4. I've had a shocker of a week for these reasons. And that kind of depth of conversation takes a little while to get to, but if you've got the right team environment, once you build that trust and someone does come out and say, actually, I've had a shocker of a week, I'm a 4, not once have I seen anything but complete compassion and wrapping arms around that individual to pick them up and bring them back up to an 8 or 10.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess the next thing that I'll look at is in terms of barriers. What are common barriers for leaders to be engaged or lead by example?
I think there's 2. Number one is time. We're all super, super busy. So we need to believe in our hearts that, the right culture in the end will make the entire organisation far more productive and a better place to work. So if you sort of look at it through that lens, you'll always find a way to navigate through the barrier of time. I think one of the other barriers is one of fear, and that is that, sometimes, people aren't comfortable being vulnerable themselves, and they're nervous about making it a safe place for other people to be vulnerable, because they might ask for help and you may not know how to help them. So I think there's certainly this challenge around, I'm really, really busy and I'm kind of frightened about what I may open if I sort of make the place vulnerable and supportive.
It's one of those things, I suppose, is that people don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to say the wrong answer, and they're worried that if they say something wrong, then it could cause a whole stack of different issues.
Oh, totally. And, I'm not sure there is a right or a wrong answer. And I think you can get too held up on that. And I'm certainly not an expert from a psychology point of view, but And Olivia may want to jump in, but I would think that, you know, just being there and asking is probably pretty powerful, right? You don't, when people come to you and you're there and they can ask, they're not always looking for an answer. They're just looking for someone to listen.
Absolutely, and I think it comes to one of the questions that was asked, and I might, while I've got you here, Mark, to address it. The question that has come through says, how do you come across genuine and not seem fake to your staff when talking about wellbeing?
Well, I mean, I think it's so important not to fall into the trap of tokenism, right? Because people see through it so quickly. I had an interesting example. I regularly sort of do the wellbeing check-ins. I try to be the leader that I want to be remembered as, and that very supportive, inclusive, vulnerable type of leader. But I the last Are You OK Day, I sent an email out to all my staff, and it was a typical kind of update about a whole bunch of stuff. And I reminded them it was Are You OK Day, and I said, by the way, if you're not okay, let me know. And I had a handful of people that reached out to me. And I thought to myself, I need to, even though their issues really weren't important to me at that moment in time, I had a really busy day. I looked at it and thought, I've made this offer. I need to prioritize the response really quick. It didn't mean I needed to have all the answers, but I absolutely needed to be there to respond and to listen. So for me, you know, it's about the follow through. It's about making sure that it's not tokenism. And it takes a little bit of time to build that trust, but I think if you do continually follow through and if you mean it, that's when you'll build the trust.
Yeah, look, I think it's quite interesting that you say all that, because the 4 key steps of the Are You OK conversation is around asking the question. And right there, we can see that you did ask the question. Second step is to listen. You have taken that time to really take on board what that person is saying. The third is to encourage action. And then really, once you have determined what that level of seriousness or engagement and what you need of that person, you can then guide them. So whether it's through the EAP, which you've wonderfully revamped in your organisation, or whether it's just having that coffee or making yourself available. And then the 4th step comes in with that check-in. Come back to that person and make sure that they can see that sincerity come through.
I think the other thing is to absolutely not dismiss the person. I think, you know, problems mean different things to different people, right? And what I see as a big problem may be a small problem in your eyes and vice versa. And I think when someone finally gets the courage to raise a problem and be vulnerable, the very worst thing that you can do is dismiss it or tell them it's not worth worrying about. I think you just need to listen.
Yep, absolutely.
And if it's a big issue for them, it's a big issue for them. That's all that matters.
Well, that's right, because everyone's experiences are going to be different, and a bit to the point of talking about your mental health first aid, and it's about the person's psychological experiences, their biological experiences, and what their social experiences are made up of. And so it's those experiences that really define on our particular perceptions on what we see, what we do, how we behave, and how we act. So absolutely not dismissing it. It could be that person's biggest crisis.
Yes.
So really taking that time to focus and pay attention and really look at what it is that their concern is.
Yeah.
I'll ask this question of Olivia. This one's just come through, Olivia. How can champions build a supportive Are You OK culture with teams working remotely?
Yeah, okay. So this is a bit of a challenging one, as I guess we've all been experiencing over the past 12 months plus now. But I think in the remote world, what champions can really do is 2 things. They can provide information. So you could maybe put some wellbeing hints, tips in a newsletter, send it across, start a new end of week kind of summary with some mindfulness tips or something like that. And they can also create the space to connect, as I mentioned, and as Mark's been saying, sometimes you just need that space to talk and to connect with your team. So through COVID, we found that most kind of organisations have focused on their interactions as being very much work focused, and we lost that informal conversation, that informal check-in time, which you get a lot out of. So creating that space to be able to do that and connect with people, I think. Yeah, and also just modeling the things you want to be doing. If you're taking a break, say that you're taking a break, and not being afraid to share that. And as Mark mentioned, that being a little bit vulnerable yourself goes a long way, and it breaks down those kind of barriers with other people as well.
I mean, I'd just jump in. I'd challenge everyone to the wellbeing check-in that I spoke about. Just take it into your organisation and try it. There's absolutely no cost for doing this. There's no downside. The one thing that I think you really get out of it and why it applies so much in a remote work environment is, if someone's having a bit of a rough time and you're in the office, you can often see it physically in them and you can check in, but you don't pick those cues up online. So, with the wellbeing check-in, you just kind of nudge that conversation along enough to perhaps get some insight that you just may not have picked up by not having the body language in front of you.
Absolutely. And I think the long-held belief, and this is when we used to go into offices and working in an office environment, is that we have that contact and we have that connection with people. So it's quite easy for you to see, oh, geez, Mustafa's got his head down today. Gee, I wonder what's going on. I might approach him and have that conversation. But when you're not having those conversations, you're not seeing the people, you're not seeing the behavior, it's really important that you reach out. And one of the things that I know that we do in my own personal team is that we have a daily check-in, and that daily check-in is not necessarily talking about work. It's just, how are you going? How's everything going? Is the workload okay? But then we have once a week, hey, how did the week go? Or what are you planning to do this week or next week? Depends on what day that check-in is. And then we can say, oh, great, your work level is a little bit high. I'll make sure I check in regularly. Or, oh, you don't have such a high workload this week. Do you reckon you might be able to support us in that regard as well?
Yep.
So the final question that I'll touch on here, and I'll try my best to provide comment, and if either Mark or Olivia, you want to jump in as well. The question is, how can you involve people who are culturally and linguistically diverse in our plans and our efforts? Now, one of the things that I would say to that, and again, you guys can jump in, is that we need to be culturally sensitive. And cultural sensitivity doesn't just look at diversity from an ethnicity perspective. It looks at an LGBTIQ plus lens, and how we can be sensitive to the people in your workplace. So maybe if you're unaware of how people are going, or a little bit unsure of that particular cultural group, try and learn a little bit about it before you try and approach that conversation. Is there anything that you guys want to add to that?
Oh, I would just add, if you don't know about it, you can ask as well.
Yeah.
People are happy to share. You just have to demonstrate a bit of curiosity and involvement. It's just involve people in it. You don't have to necessarily do all the planning and everything. You can ask how they would like it to go as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think, inclusion is really, really important, and giving people a voice. And we're quite good at celebrating big things like Christmas and Easter throughout the year, but our culture that we have in this country is far more than that these days. And I think it's really important that you reach out to the various groups within your organisation and try and find out what's important to them, and bring that in for a celebration. We celebrate Ramadan. We celebrate the Indian Festival of the Lights. I've just gone completely blank on
Diwali.
Diwali, that's it, yeah. And I think it's really important to go to those groups that you've got within your workplace and give them a leading role in helping the whole organisation to celebrate that and to educate the whole organisation. And I think that is really powerful from a culture point of view.
Yeah, terrific. So we're just about out of time, so I will wrap up there, but I do want to special thanks to Mark and Olivia for making themselves available today to share their stories and their experiences. Are You OK Day this year is on Thursday, the 9th of September. But one of the most important things to remember that every day is an Are You OK Day. Don't wait for September the 9th to ask your colleagues and your mates or your family and friends how they're going. Every day is an opportunity for us to have that conversation. Every day should be that conversation starter. So please ask that of your friends, family and colleagues. Make sure you visit areuk.org.au to get your free copy of the Workplace Champions Guide. There's certainly some hints and tips. Look up the signs to look out for, and remember those 4 simple steps that you can take to start that very important conversation. So I want to thank you all at home and in your various workplaces for joining us today in our second Workplace Champions webinar. Thanks very much, Mark and Olivia, for joining us today. It's been a really insightful chat, and I hope those who are tuned in have been able to take plenty away from the chat today. So thank you very much for your time. Be safe and well. Those questions that you've popped in to the Q&A are currently being answered by the Are You OK team. So for the questions that we weren't able to address today live in the webinar, they're still being addressed. So the guys are feverishly typing their responses. So thanks very much for joining us. Be safe, and remember, every day is an Are You OK day.